There's a fairly common habit, almost invisible in how automatic it is, diminishing oneself. Not out of malice, but out of a kind of reflex cultivated over the years. The idea that recognizing one's own worth would be arrogance, and that true humility requires feeling small in the face of anything great. This lesson proposes something entirely different. It doesn't ask for forced modesty, nor does it invite inflating the ego with empty statements. Instead, it invites a direct look at something rarely considered. The possibility that the highest greatness imaginable isn't distant, reserved only for some unreachable divine figure, but truly belongs, in fact, to the one considering it. Today's idea states, "The glory of my Father is my own." Not a reduced portion, not a pale reflection, not some simplified version set aside for human beings. The entire glory, shared, belonging equally to whoever receives it. This is a bold proposal, and for that very reason, it's worth examining carefully, without rushing, allowing it to be truly understood in its depth. The text opens with a clear request, that the truth about one's identity not be hidden behind a false humility. That phrase deserves special attention, because it points to something subtle. There's a difference between true humility and a kind of disguise that, under the appearance of modesty, actually denies something real and important. False humility happens when someone insists on seeing themselves as smaller than they truly are, as if that were a sign of virtue. But denying one's own greatness isn't humility. It's simply another way of distorting the truth, just as mistaken as excessive arrogance. True humility, according to this teaching, isn't found in diminishing what one is, but in honestly recognizing both the gifts received and their source, without inventing merits of one's own, but also without denying what was truly given. The text then invites a simple, direct gratitude for the gifts offered, not as an obligation or duty, but as a natural recognition of something truly generous. And then a powerful question arises. Would it be possible to see, in those with whom this glory is shared, any trace of sin or guilt? This question invites an important reflection. Thinking of people admired for their wisdom, compassion, or serenity, perhaps someone dearly loved, perhaps a spiritual figure held up as an example, the mind rarely associates them with deep guilt or irredeemable flaws. On the contrary, there's a tendency to see them as worthy, valuable, deserving of every good thing they have. The lesson then asks, and why would the very person making this reflection be excluded from that same group? If the love shown is constant and eternal, recognizing each son exactly as he was created, there could be no exceptions. Either everyone shares in that same glory, without distinction, or the very idea of a perfect, constant love would lose its meaning. The second part of the lesson offers direct thanks for the light that shines forever within each person, and it adds something particularly meaningful, honoring that light, precisely because it was freely shared. That gesture of honoring isn't vanity. It's sincere recognition of a gift received, and therefore also respect for the one who gave it. The text closes by affirming complete oneness, united in that light, united also with the very source of that light, at peace with all creation and with oneself. This conclusion ties the whole lesson together around one essential point. Recognizing one's own glory doesn't separate anyone from anyone else. On the contrary, it's precisely this recognition that reveals the true oneness among all. To understand why so many people resist this idea of deserving glory, it helps to notice how the mind tends to associate personal worth with achievement. From a very young age, it's learned that recognition must be earned through effort, performance, favorable comparison with others. Faced with that, the proposal that something as elevated as divine glory already belongs, innately and freely, sounds almost implausible. This conditioning creates a quiet resistance. Even in the presence of spiritual teachings that clearly state this inherent worth, the mind often looks for ways to reduce that statement, perhaps interpreting it as metaphor or applying it only to advanced spiritual figures, never to oneself. This resistance, understandable as it is, reveals exactly what this lesson calls false humility, a disguised refusal to fully recognize what is already true. It's important to clarify that the glory mentioned here doesn't refer to social status, public recognition, or any form of outward distinction. It's something much deeper, the light inherent to one's own essence, created and shared by a source of unconditional love. That light doesn't need to be built, cultivated, or earned. It simply is, always, a constitutive part of every mind. The role of the Holy Spirit in this context is precisely to help recognize that inner light, even when it seems obscured by years of limiting beliefs about worthiness and personal value. He doesn't impose this truth abruptly, but patiently offers constant opportunities for that distorted perception to be gradually corrected. It's also worth reflecting on the idea of oneness present in this lesson. If the glory mentioned belongs equally to everyone, then recognizing that truth in oneself necessarily implies recognizing it in others as well. It isn't possible to sincerely affirm one's own worth while denying that same worth in someone else, since both share exactly the same origin, the same light, the same glory. This understanding directly challenges common patterns of comparison and competition. If glory isn't a limited resource fought over by a few winners, but something fully available and shared equally by all, then every form of rivalry loses its foundation. No one needs to stand out at another's expense, because there's no scarcity whatsoever in this particular kind of worth. Bringing this understanding into daily life begins with paying close attention to the moments when the tendency to diminish personal achievements or qualities arises automatically. A common example: upon receiving a sincere compliment about something well done, many people immediately respond by minimizing it. It was nothing. Anyone would have done the same. It was luck, not my merit. That automatic reaction, however modest it may seem, may actually represent exactly the false humility mentioned in the lesson. A simple practical exercise is, the next time a genuine compliment is received, allowing oneself simply to say, "Thank you," without immediately denying or diminishing what was recognized. This small change in behavior, repeated consistently, gradually helps the mind grow accustomed to the idea of true worthiness. Another practical example involves moments of social comparison, so common especially in the context of social media or competitive environments. Upon noticing someone else achieving success, recognition, or personal fulfillment, a subtle feeling of envy or inadequacy often arises, as if the other person's achievement somehow threatened one's own worth. In that specific moment, this lesson's central idea can be applied directly, recognizing that the glory celebrated in that person doesn't diminish in any way the glory equally available to the one observing the situation. There's no real competition over something that already fully belongs to everyone at once. A third practical example arises in situations of excessive self-criticism, especially after perceived mistakes or failures. Upon making a significant slip, perhaps a poorly chosen word, a badly handled task, a broken promise, the mind often quickly concludes something like, "I'm incapable," or "I don't deserve any recognition at all." In that moment, it's worth pausing and remembering the idea proposed. the glory of my Father is my own. Not as a denial of the mistake made, but as a reminder that this specific mistake doesn't erase and never has erased the essential, permanent worth that has always been present. Regularly practicing this idea can also happen in a more structured way. In the morning, before the day's activities begin, this idea can be mentally repeated, allowing it to settle calmly before everyday concerns take over one's thoughts. Throughout the day, whenever a situation of comparison, self-criticism, or doubt about one's own worth arises, this same idea can be brought back, serving as a direct reminder of what is truly real, regardless of momentary circumstances. Faced with such a broad proposal, legitimate questions naturally arise. A thought might surface. If this glory truly belongs to me, why do I feel so little of it in practice, in everyday life? This question deserves careful examination rather than simple dismissal. The answer this teaching suggests is that experiencing this glory depends directly on conscious recognition, not merely on the theoretical truth of its existence. Just as someone might possess a significant talent but never develop it for lack of practice or personal acknowledgement, the glory mentioned in this lesson also needs to be actively remembered and recognized for its presence to be felt more tangibly in everyday experience. It's worth reflecting on specific moments when a sense of fullness, deep connection, or true peace has already been felt. Perhaps during a moment of silent contemplation, an instant of real connection with someone else, or even something as simple as watching a particularly beautiful sunset. Those moments, brief as they may be, offer valuable clues about the nature of this inner glory, something that doesn't depend on specific outside circumstances, but reveals itself whenever the mind is open and present enough. An interesting practical experience for the coming days is deliberately observing other people through this same lens the lesson proposes. When interacting with someone, whether a family member, a co-worker, or even a stranger in an everyday situation, it's possible to make a conscious effort to recognize, even silently, that same glory present in that person, regardless of outward appearances or momentary behavior. Noticing, over a few days of this practice, whether there's any perceptible shift in the quality of these interactions. It's also worth reflecting on specific situations of social comparison that tend to generate discomfort. Perhaps there's a particular person whose success or public recognition tends to trigger feelings of envy or inadequacy. Consciously applying this lesson's idea to that particular situation, recognizing that this person's glory doesn't compete in any way with the glory equally available to the one observing, can reveal, over time, a significant shift in how that specific kind of comparison is experienced. Recognizing that the glory mentioned in this lesson already belongs innately to every person isn't an invitation to arrogance, nor a denial of genuine humility. It is instead an invitation to finally set aside that false modesty, which, under the appearance of virtue, actually denies something deeply true and valuable. This glory doesn't need to be earned through extraordinary effort, nor compared and fought over with anyone else. It simply is, always, a constitutive part of one's own essence, shared equally by all, without exception. Throughout today, whenever the opportunity arises, facing a compliment received, an uncomfortable social comparison, or simply a quiet, reflective moment, it's worth remembering the idea proposed. The glory of my Father is my own. Not as a claim of superiority, but as a simple, true recognition of something that has always been present, only waiting to be fully accepted. Thank you so much. See you in the next lesson.